She was loud, she was fearless, she was wrong sometimes, and right even more often, and she never once apologized for taking up space in a room. Maude Findlay walked onto American television in 1972, like a thunderstorm that nobody had ordered but everyone desperately needed. But here's the question that brought you to this video today. After the curtain fell on Tuckahoe, after the laugh track went silent for the last time, what became of the remarkable men and women who built that world? Who is still with us? And who did we lose along the way? Hi, my name is Edward, and this is Screen Legends, Bea Arthur, Maude Findlay. There are performers who inhabit a role, and then there are performers who become so completely fused with a character that it is almost impossible to say where one ends and the other begins. Bea Arthur was 60 years old. Wait, let me correct that. Bea Arthur was 49 when Maude Findlay first appeared on television screens, and she arrived not as someone new, but as someone fully formed, as though Maude had been waiting inside her all along, and simply needed a camera pointed in her direction to finally emerge. Maude Findlay was a Connecticut liberal living in Tuckahoe, New York, a woman on her fourth marriage navigating the turbulent waters of 1970s, feminism, family dysfunction, and her own ferocious need to be heard. She was opinionated in the way that made some viewers cheer and others reach for the dial. She was compassionate and contradictory, commanding and quietly terrified of being ordinary. And through 6 seasons, Bea Arthur never let the character become a caricature. Even when the writing pushed Maude toward the edge of self-parody, Arthur found the human being underneath and pulled her back to solid ground. What made the performance so enduring was its specificity. This was not a type. This was a woman, flawed, funny, fiercely alive. The famous 2-part episode in Season 1, in which Maude decides to have an abortion at the age of 47, remains one of the most discussed and most contested moments in American sitcom history. Bea Arthur played those episodes without flinching and without softening the edges, and she earned the nation's attention in a way that very few television performances ever have. Born Bernice Frankel on May 13, 1922, in New York City, Bea Arthur had already built a distinguished stage and television career before Maude came along. After the series ended in 1978, she did not slow down for even a moment. She went on to star as Dorothy Zbornak in The Golden Girls, a role that brought her a second wave of extraordinary affection from audiences and earned her an Emmy Award in 1988. She remained one of the most beloved figures in American television comedy until the very end of her life. Bea Arthur passed away on April 25, 2009, at the age of 86 following a battle with cancer. Her net worth at the time of her passing was estimated at around $12 million, accumulated through a career that spanned more than 5 decades on stage, screen, and television. She is remembered not simply as a great comedian, but as a pioneering presence, a woman who proved that complicated, difficult, unapologetically grown women could anchor a television series and make America laugh and think at the same time. She was, in the most genuine sense of the phrase, one of a kind. And here is the thing about Bea Arthur that I find myself returning to every time I research her life. She was never entirely comfortable with sentimentality about her own work. She was famously self-deprecating in interviews, quick to deflect praise and redirect toward the writers or her scene partners. That quality, that refusal to take herself too seriously, even while she's taking her craft absolutely seriously, runs all the way through her greatest performances. Maude Findlay would have approved. Dorothy Zbornak definitely would have given her a withering look and then quietly agreed. Bill Macy. Walter Findlay. Every great leading performance needs an equally great scene partner, and in Bill Macy, Bea Arthur found someone who could hold his own ground without ever trying to steal her spotlight. That is a rarer talent than it sounds. Bill Macy was 44 years old when he stepped into the role of Walter Findlay, Maude's devoted, frequently exasperated, and genuinely loving 4th husband. Walter was not a simple man, though he was often played against Maude's volcanic energy as a kind of calm wall for her to bounce off. He was a successful appliance store owner, a man shaped by conventional middle-class values, who had somehow fallen completely and irreversibly in love with the most unconventional woman in Tuckahoe. Their marriage was one of television's great comic partnerships precisely because it felt real. Two people who genuinely frustrated each other and genuinely could not imagine being without each other. Macy brought a quality to Walter that could have easily been overlooked in a lesser performance: warmth. Real, unguarded warmth. When Walter was embarrassed by Maude's outbursts, you laughed. When he quietly supported her through her hardest moments, you believed every second of it. Born William Garber Macy on May 18, 1922, in Brooklyn, New York. And yes, he and Bea Arthur shared almost the exact same birthday, which feels like it must mean something, though I could not tell you what. Bill Macy had a long and steady career in theater before finding his way to television. After Maude concluded in 1978, he continued working in film and television, though never again at quite the same level of visibility. His later years were spent largely away from the spotlight, in the quiet and private life he had always preferred. Bill Macy passed away on September 21, 2019, at the age of 97. 97. The man outlived the television era that made him famous by more than 4 decades, which is either a remarkable testament to his constitution or simply proof that playing Walter Findlay for 6 seasons was nowhere near as stressful as it looked. His net worth at the time of his passing was estimated at around $2 million, built through many decades of consistent and dedicated professional work. He is remembered fondly by everyone who watched Maude as the steady, good-hearted man who loved a woman most people would have found exhausting, and who never once seemed to regret it. There is a whole philosophy of life contained in that, if you think about it long enough. Bill Macy thought about it for 97 years, and apparently arrived at a peaceful conclusion. Adrienne Barbeau, Carol Trainer. If Maude was the thunder, then Carol was the lightning. Quicker, sharper, and always arriving just when the scene needed a jolt of something younger and more dangerous. Adrienne Barbeau was 27 years old when she took on the role of Carol Trainer, Maude's divorced daughter, from a previous marriage who lived with her young son, Philip, in her mother's home. Carol was progressive and spirited, and, in the grand tradition of daughters everywhere, simultaneously her mother's greatest admirer and most perceptive critic. She pushed back against Maude with a wit that was entirely her own, and she did it with a warmth that made even their arguments feel like a form of love. What Barbeau brought to Carol was a modern sensibility, a sense that this young woman had her own full interior life that existed well beyond the boundaries of her mother's orbit. Carol was not simply a supporting player in Maude's story. She was a woman navigating single motherhood in the 1970s with humor and resilience. And Barbeau played every beat of that with an honesty that made the character entirely believable. Born June 11, 1945, in Sacramento, California, Adrienne Barbeau had come to the role from a successful Broadway career, having earned a Tony nomination for her work in Grease. After Maude, her life in the entertainment industry took a fascinating and somewhat unexpected turn. She became a beloved figure in horror films through her collaborations with director John Carpenter, most memorably in The Fog in 1980 and Escape from New York in 1981, establishing herself in a completely different genre from the domestic comedy that had first made her a household name. And here is something that genuinely delighted me when I came across it in my research. Adrienne Barbeau has never really stopped. She continued working in television, film, and even voice acting well into the 21st century, lending her unmistakable presence to animated series and independent productions alike. She also became a published author, writing both a memoir and a series of novels. Today, Adrienne Barbeau is 80 years old. Her net worth is estimated at around $5 million, accumulated through a remarkably varied career that has refused to be confined to any single genre or decade. She remains one of the most genuinely multi-dimensional figures to have emerged from the Maude cast, and one of the very few who is still here with us today to appreciate the legacy she helped build. If you have never gone back and watched her work in The Fog, I would encourage you to do so, not only because it is genuinely excellent, but because it will permanently complicate any simple story you might have been tempted to tell about the actress who played Carol Trainer. Adrienne Barbeau has always been more than one thing, and she has always known it. Conrad Bain, Dr. Arthur Harmon. There is a particular kind of actor who makes you believe completely in a character you would probably find insufferable at a dinner party. And Conrad Bain was that actor with an almost unsettling level of consistency throughout the entire run of Maude. You watched Arthur Harmon, and you recognized him immediately. Not because he was a cartoon, but because he was real. That is the difficult trick, and Bain pulled it off week after week without ever appearing to break a sweat. Conrad Bain was 44 years old when he first stepped into the role of Dr. Arthur Harmon, the Finleys' next-door neighbor in Tuckahoe, a physician, a Republican, and a man who was constitutionally, almost biologically, incapable of allowing any progressive idea to pass through his field of vision without registering his full and considered disapproval. He was the kind of neighbor who kept the hedges perfectly trimmed and quietly believed that the disorder emanating from the house across the fence was a symptom of something deeply wrong with the direction of the country. And here is the thing that made Arthur Harmon genuinely interesting, rather than simply annoying. He was not the villain of Maude. Not exactly. He was something far more nuanced and far more useful than that. He was the voice of a certain kind of comfortable, conventional, middle-class America that had always believed itself to be the calm and reasonable center of things. And that found the Finley household a source of genuine bewilderment. He was not cruel. He was not stupid. He was a man who had built a perfectly ordered life and could not understand why his neighbor kept setting fire to the furniture. Bain played that quality with a balance of pomposity and vulnerability that kept Arthur from ever collapsing into a simple punching bag for Maude's arguments. Underneath all the bluster and the spluttering indignation, there was something unmistakably human. A man who actually liked his neighbors, who cared about them in his own tightly buttoned way, even as they drove him to the outer edges of his patience on a weekly basis. The verbal sparring matches between Arthur and Maude were among the most reliably entertaining sequences the series ever produced. And the reason they worked was straightforward. Both performers genuinely listened to each other. You cannot fake that chemistry. You either have it or you do not. Born February 4th, 1923, in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, Conrad Bain brought decades of serious stage and screen work to the role before Maude ever came along. After the series concluded, he went on to reach an entirely new generation of viewers as the warm and wealthy Philip Drummond in Different Strokes, which ran from 1978 to 1986 and remains one of the more beloved family sitcoms of that era. Conrad Bain passed away on January 14, 2013, at the age of 89. His net worth at the time of his passing was estimated at around $4 million, earned through 5 decades of deeply committed work in theater and television. He is remembered as one of the great straight men of his generation, an actor who understood, with rare clarity, that being the butt of the joke is its own demanding art form, and who practiced that art with consistent dignity, precision, and grace. Rue McClanahan, Vivian Harmon before she was Blanche Devereaux, before the Lanai, before the Golden Girls turned her into a genuine television legend. Rue McClanahan was Vivian Harmon, and if you never watched Maude, you may not fully appreciate just how different those two characters were, or how extraordinary it was that the same woman played them both so completely. Rue McClanahan was 38 years old when she stepped into the role of Vivian Harmon, Arthur's warm, slightly scatterbrained, and genuinely sweet-natured wife. Where Arthur was rigid and defensive, Vivian was open and generous. Where he dug his heels into the ground at the first sign of a change, she moved through the world with a kind of gentle curiosity that made her immediately lovable. She and Maude were genuine friends, not the kind who agreed on everything, but the kind who showed up for each other without conditions. McClanahan played Vivian with a softness that served as the perfect counterweight to Bea Arthur's sharpness across the fence, and the friendship between the two characters gave the show some of its most genuinely moving moments, particularly in the later seasons when both women were navigating the specific losses and reckonings that come with midlife. Born February 21, 1934, in Healdton, Oklahoma, Rue McClanahan had worked steadily in theater and television for years before Maude brought her to wider attention. After the series ended, she went on to The Golden Girls, where her portrayal of the flamboyant and romantically adventurous Blanche earned her an Emmy Award in 1987. It is the role most audiences remember her by today, and it is a magnificent performance. But Vivian Harmon is where the story really began. Rue McClanahan passed away on June 3, 2010, at the age of 76, following a brain hemorrhage. Her net worth at the time of her passing was estimated at around $5 million. She is remembered with enormous affection by the generations of television viewers she made laugh and cry across more than 4 decades of extraordinary work. Esther Roll, Florida Evans. Some characters are so specific and so alive that they refuse to stay contained within the show that first introduced them. Florida Evans was one of those characters, and Esther Roll was the reason why. Esther Roll was 46 years old when she stepped into the role of Florida Evans, the Findlays' housekeeper, a woman of deep intelligence, deep faith, and a deep unwillingness to be treated as anything less than exactly who she was. Florida was not a background character. She was a fully realized human being who happened to work in the Findlay household, and she had opinions and principles and a moral clarity that frequently outpaced everyone else in the room, including Maude herself. Maude's Roll played her with a dignity and authority that was impossible to overlook, and audiences fell in love with her immediately. The character resonated so strongly that Norman Lear built an entire spin-off around her. Good Times premiered on CBS in January 1974, following Florida and her husband James Evans as they navigated life in a Chicago housing project. It became one of the defining American sitcoms of the decade, and it made Esther Roll a genuine television icon. Born November 8, 1920, in Pompey, Florida, the 10th of 18 children, which is the kind of biographical detail that makes you pause and think about what resilience actually looks like at its origin, Esther Roll brought to everything she touched a sense of earned authority. She was not just performing dignity, she had lived it. After Good Times, she continued working in film and television, earning an Emmy nomination for the television film Summer of My German Soldier in 1978. She remained active in the industry through the 1990s, appearing in projects that consistently reflected her uncompromising standards. Esther Roll passed away on November 17, 1998, at the age of 78 after a long battle with diabetes. Her net worth at the time of her passing was estimated at around $3 million. She is remembered as one of the most powerful presences in American television history, an actress who understood that representation is not simply about visibility, but about truth. Florida Evans walked into the Findlay household as a supporting character and walked out of American television history as something considerably larger than that. That is the Esther Roll effect, and no amount of time has diminished it. John Amos. Henry Evans. John Amos appeared in Maude only briefly in a handful of episodes before his character, Henry Evans, evolved into James Evans for the Good Times spin-off. But his impact on the fabric of the show was significant enough that no honest account of the Maude cast can leave him out. John Amos was 32 years old when he appeared as Henry Evans, Florida's husband, a man of warmth and substance who clearly adored his wife and provided a stabilizing, grounded counterpart to the frequently chaotic energy of the Findlay household. Even in limited screen time, Amos projected a kind of physical and moral solidity that was immediately compelling. Born December 27, 1938, in Newark, New Jersey, John Amos had a varied background that included professional football before he turned seriously to acting. The role of James Evans in Good Times brought him the widest recognition of his career, a portrayal of black fatherhood that was groundbreaking in its refusal to deal in stereotypes, and that remains historically significant decades later. He departed Good Times after season 3, in a well-documented dispute with the producers over the direction of the show, a decision that reflected his deep commitment to the integrity of the characters he played. After Good Times, John Amos continued working across film and television with remarkable consistency. His appearance in Roots in 1977 as the adult Kunta Kinte remains one of the defining performances in American television history, reaching an estimated audience of over 100 million viewers during its original broadcast and cementing his place in the cultural record permanently. Today, John Amos is 86 years old. His net worth is estimated at around $4 million, built through more than 5 decades of steady, serious, and frequently extraordinary work. He remains one of the last living links to the world that Maude helped create, and his continued presence feels like something genuinely worth celebrating. I will be honest, when I was putting this script together, the fact that John Amos is still with us felt like a small gift. The history of Maude is, as you have already gathered, a history marked by significant loss. Every living voice from that era matters more because of the ones that have gone quiet. Hermione Baddeley, Mrs. Nell Naugatuck. There is something uniquely delightful about a British actress showing up in the middle of a very American domestic comedy and proceeding to steal every scene she enters without appearing to break a sweat. Hermione Baddeley did exactly that. Hermione Baddeley was 63 years old when she took on the role of Mrs. Nell Naugatuck, the Finley's sharp-tongued, frequently tippling British housekeeper who replaced Florida Evans in seasons 4 and 5 of the series. Naugatuck arrived with an air of slightly battered gentility and a relationship with alcohol that the show played for laughs while somehow managing to keep the characters sympathetic. She was combative with Maude in a way that felt entirely different from every other combative relationship in the series. Less ideological, more personal, more like two women who respected each other underneath all the friction. Born November 13, 1906, in Broseley, Shropshire, England, Hermione Baddeley had an extraordinary career that reached back to British Music Hall and extended through decades of stage, film, and television work on both sides of the Atlantic. She had received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for Room at the Top in 1959, a nomination she received famously for approximately 2 minutes of screen time, which remains one of the more remarkable statistical facts in Oscar history. The woman could do more in 2 minutes than most actors manage in 2 hours. Hermione Baddeley passed away on August 19, 1986, at the age of 79. Her net worth at the time of her passing reflected a long career rather than a lucrative one. She was a working actress in the most dignified sense of that phrase, someone who showed up and gave everything she had regardless of the size of the role. She is remembered with particular affection by Maude fans for the crackle and humanity she brought to a character who could have easily been nothing more than a comic device. Jaume Dizzyford's Pat O'Malley, Bert Beasley. There is a certain kind of performer whose face you recognize the moment they appear on screen without necessarily being able to name them. Someone who has been so consistently present across decades of film and television that they have become a kind of permanent fixture in the background of American entertainment history. Pat O'Malley was exactly that performer, and his 22 episodes as Bert Beasley in the later seasons of Maude represent just one small chapter in one of the more quietly extraordinary careers the industry ever produced. Born James Rudolph O'Malley on March 15, 1904, in Burnley, Lancashire, England, O'Malley arrived in the world of entertainment from a genuinely different era. He sang with Jack Hilton and his orchestra in the United Kingdom from 1930 to 1935, which means that by the time he was appearing on American television in the 1970s, he had already lived through more than 4 decades of show business in 2 countries. That is not a career, that is a saga. He came to the United States at the outbreak of World War II, and once he arrived, he never really stopped working. He appeared in films alongside major Hollywood stars, stepped onto Broadway, and then embraced television with an enthusiasm that kept him in front of cameras well into his late 70s. His recurring roles included Sam Petrie on The Dick Van Dyke Show, Harry Burns on My Favorite Martian, and Pat Pending on Batman, which is a range of credits that tells you everything you need to know about his versatility and his absolute willingness to show up for any project that needed a warm, skilled, and utterly reliable character actor. On Maude, O'Malley played Bert Beasley, a recurring neighbor figure who brought an easy, old-world charm to the Tuckahoe neighborhood. He was the kind of presence that made scenes feel inhabited, a reminder that the Finley household existed inside an actual community with actual people in it, rather than floating in the televisual void that lesser sitcoms sometimes occupy. He was 71 years old when he first appeared on the show, and he played every moment with the unhurried confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Pat O'Malley passed away on February 27, 1985, at the age of 80 in San Juan Capistrano, California. He is remembered as one of the great working character actors of the 20th century. A man who crossed an ocean, survived a world war, and spent the better part of 6 decades making every room he walked into feel more alive. Bert Beasley was lucky to have him. So was American television. Maude ran for 6 seasons and 140 episodes, and it was uncomfortable and funny and sometimes infuriating and often deeply moving, and it changed American television in ways that are still being felt today. Norman Lear has said in interviews over the years that the goal was never simply to entertain, but to hold a mirror up to the country and trust audiences to be adult enough to look at what was reflected back. Bea Arthur, Bill Macy, Adrienne Barbeau, Conrad Bain, Rue McClanahan, Esther Roll, John Amos, Hermione Baddeley. They were the ones who made that mirror shine. Some of them are gone now. Bea Arthur, Bill Macy, Conrad Bain, Rue McClanahan, Esther Roll, Hermione Baddeley. Each departure left a particular kind of silence. The silence that follows a voice you had forgotten was still speaking until suddenly it was not. And some of them are still here. Adrienne Barbeau, still working and still electric at 80 years old. John Amos at 86, one of the last living threads connecting us back to that specific and irreplaceable moment in American television history. I want to say something before we finish, and I hope you will indulge me for just a moment. Shows like Maude do not get made by accident. They get made by people who are willing to risk something. Writers who put dangerous ideas on the page, producers who back them, and actors who stand in front of a camera and make the dangerous ideas feel like life. That takes courage. It always has. Thank you for spending this time with me and with the remarkable people who brought Maude Findlay's world to life. If this journey has meant something to you, I hope you will follow Screen Legends and join us again as we continue exploring the stories that live behind the lights of the screen. These memories are worth keeping. I will see you in the next one.